Dative, integrative and preventive healthcare. The content discussed in this episode is for informative purposes only
and should not be replaced by individualized professional consultations or professional medical advice.
Hey guys, I'm Tasha.
Hey listeners, this is Goonie, and we're here to discuss lifestyle medicine.
Today, we'd like to kind of speak about the use of breathwork and how we can use breathwork in different types of seasons and how that actually can impact the mind-body connection and our overall well-being. And for that, we have James Tennant, a licensed and qualified Ayurvedic practitioner and yoga practitioner, and also the director and co-founder of Tejas Yoga, which is a Chicago-based, in the United States, yoga studio. Welcome, James, to Dative the podcast.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Welcome, James. So I don't know if you guys can relate, but for me, seasons are just I have a relationship with them.
I mean, it's hard.
I have a hate-love relationship with winter, for example, where I like the fact that, we're slowing down, but I hate the fact that it's cold and I can't go out and I feel crippled by weather.
I mean, I think you're in a boat with a lot of people, and different seasons affect different people in different ways. So Ayurveda is always going to look at what the person's constitution is, right? So if somebody that are more of a fiery nature, they might really love the winter time, right? For them, they feel like they get reprieve, right? But summertime, they're flying off the handle every 5 seconds. They're profusely sweating. They're just like, can the season get over with? It's pretty revealing about somebody's personality and behavioral characteristics, depending on which season you love.
For me, I like summer, but then I feel I need a little bit more of a cooler temperature, but not too cold. And so autumn is like a great in between, and I love the leaves changing colors.
For me, autumn is like the worst because the beginning of the end of the year. It feels like everything's falling. It's the closure of a year where I start, feeling anxious.
Interestingly, so I read this statistic and many different articles actually that talked about this, where it's called SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder. According to the Yale Winter Research Clinic, seasonal affective disorder is a syndrome where people experience worse moods seasonally. And most estimates suggest that it's 2 to 4 more times more common in women than men, which is also another interesting fact to note. Is this something like you see as a yoga practitioner, as a person who understands Ayurveda?
Yeah, and we're talking about pretty specific symptoms that do show up seasonally for people. I think when people are dealing with depression and anxiety year long, and these are these aren't just moods necessarily, and so Ayurveda has a scope that it can work with, to help with those symptoms. But things that people are being affected by seasonally, they feel a little bit more tired, their sleep gets a little bit more disturbed, they tend to feel a little bit more listless, less motivated to go out and be social. So these are really like common things that happen as the season changes, where we're getting less sunlight, days are shorter, but oftentimes those kind of moods will lift once the days start to get longer. So I just want to make that distinction because I think it's really important, because I think anxiety and depression can be a result of like longer term seasonal affect disorder. But I would want to recommend a breathing technique for somebody that's suffering from depression more long term than seasonally. But definitely. I do think that I see this quite often, and Ayurveda is always looking at things through these basic principles. One, we're a microcosm of the macrocosm. So everything that's out in nature is within us. Mm-hmm. And then we're always looking at things through the elements and the qualities that are associated with those elements, either air, fire, water, earth. And so we're looking at the qualities of the season and knowing that all qualities have their opposite. So when you're looking at the qualities of the season, winter in Miami is going to be very different than winter in Chicago. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So we're really looking at and observing, what are the qualities of the season that we're living in. So most of the time we're talking about a 4-season environment, right? When we're talking
Right.
about winter, we think cold, damp, low,
Right.
cloudy. We think those things. And everybody, you know, in the winter months, they're always dealing with shorter days, right? And usually,
Yeah.
oftentimes less sunlight. So that's something that we can all share. And so it's definitely something that comes up for quite a few people. And Ayurveda is looking at these two basic principles to help remedy the situation. So when we're looking at qualities of the season, we want to understand that like increases like, and the
Right.
opposite balances. Those are two principles that, no matter how complex and vast this amazing system of Ayurveda is, I've always been taught to go back to those basic principles. And over the 18
Mm,
years, I see myself doing that over and over again. Is, you know, what are the qualities that are affecting me, or what are the
Mm-hmm.
qualities of my signs and symptoms? And then if I want to remedy that through diet and lifestyle would include practices, breathing techniques, even meditation techniques to remedy that. And so that's the perspective that I'm looking at through the lens of Ayurveda of the world.
Yeah, so I guess that what you're saying is, of course, there's a season, there's the environment that will affect us, but then there's our own constitution, like our own body and how it works. And we kind of mentioned, some people are a bit more fiery and some people are more steady or grounded, and the environment will affect them. If we were to generalize, say, spring, what would you say is spring's main qualities or key elements if you were to define spring?
In a four season environment, spring is usually associated with more of a drastic change, particularly in, you know, Chicago or the Midwest, or in a lot of areas. There's a lot of changeability, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll use Chicago as an example because it's a perfect example where one day we'll have 60-degree weather and the next day we'll have 35-degree weather. So that changeability is associated with the mobile quality. And that can make people feel very ungrounded. It can make feel really kind of light and feeling very unstable. So that oftentimes is associated with spring. And then as we're looking through, as we're getting to the end of winter time, usually in the winter time, we're naturally building up more tissue in the body, right? We might
mm,
increase our fat tissue, we might increase more phlegm, mucus in the body. It's just something that we naturally go to in order to protect our organs and things like that. But what happens in the spring is, just like the ice melts,
Mm-hmm.
so does all of those built up tissue and mucus in the body. It wants to leave our body, right? So we're
mm.
kind of experiencing the same thing that nature is, but from an internal perspective. So this brings up a lot of, you know, those damp qualities, right? The heavy quality, but it's actually trying to leave the body. So it has a heaviness to it. It has a dampness to it. It has a changeability to it. So
For someone who is particularly, let's say maybe they're more heavy set and maybe when they're experiencing these symptoms, then for the opposite, like someone who's a bit more lighter and they're lankier people, would they experience a positive shift into the season because they are like that, kind of resemble that environment as well? Or would they also have some sort of opposition or experience with the change?
spring is a very interesting season for people because both things could be happening, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
somebody has more of those heavier qualities to them innately, right, and they're starting to experience this kind of what we might refer to as this internal melting where we're starting to release, their signs and symptoms are going to be different than somebody that has more of these light qualities in them, or, you know, if they're more sinewy or have those heavier qualities, where they're going to really be affected by those, that changeability, right? So they might feel a little bit more anxious, they might feel a little bit more rattled, they might feel a little bit more ungrounded, right? Where the person that might be a little bit more heavier set or have these heavier qualities to them, these more earth qualities, right, as opposed to more of the air and ether qualities, those people that have those earth and water qualities to them will start to feel what you might be referring to, and is that this release of this excess. So they might have more colds, right? They might have more congestion in the chest, congestion in the
Right.
sinuses, right? So the signs and symptoms are going to be different, even though they're being affected by the same season, based on,
Mm,
you know, what they're already predominantly um, kind of like their biochemical makeup is predominantly.
Right. Okay, so I'm living in Malaysia right now. So with the 4 seasons, right? We kind of have, I guess, 2-ish seasons. Would the same experiences occur?
Well, with 2 seasons, typically you have like a dry and a wet season. So that's what you're looking at. Whereas, you're going from the wet season, which has these heavier and more damp, dull, cloudy qualities to them. As you're leaving that wet season and going into the dry season, your body will have a very similar experience to where other people might have in spring in a 4-season environment, right? Because now there's been this buildup for months, have experienced all of these heavy, damp, cold, cloudy qualities. So we're being affected by that. And we go back to that basic principle of like increases like. So if I already have those qualities in me, predominantly those earth and water qualities, and I'm being affected by the environment, which has those same qualities, as I'm shifting into these, dry, light qualities in the dry season, my body is going to naturally want to release that buildup. It will start to create a shift. Now, there are things during those months, though, however, and this is where we start getting into the second principle of the opposite balances. So during that wet season or during the winter months, we have tools that we can use, breathing techniques, practices, lifestyle choices, diet choices, that we can help to balance the qualities that we're being affected by that are predominant in this season.
Right. Could you tell us a bit more how you could connect the breathwork to the different seasons? Since we're talking about spring, maybe you can kind of start with that.
Sure. This is where Ayurveda asks us to take a little bit more responsibility for our health. I don't want to generalize, but Westerners, we've become a little bit more dependent on what external sources say and not necessarily assessing ourselves. So Ayurveda really wants us to observe, what these more primordial signs and symptoms are. So if I'm feeling a little bit more congested, then in terms of breath work, I would want on a more regular basis to do a breathing technique that has those opposite qualities of feeling heavy or congested. So there's breathing techniques like skull shining breath or bellows breath that are more rapid paced breathing. So it's more fast, it's more forceful breathing. It has more of an uplifting energetic effect to it.
Right.
These are breathing techniques that help to clear the sinuses, improve the respiratory muscles, clear the nasal passages, and help to create internal heat. So we're balancing the cold quality and the damp quality. Now, if I was feeling very anxious, this is another person that might be experiencing these light qualities, these excessive changeability qualities. And so if I'm feeling a little ungrounded and uprooted by the changeability of the season, then I'm going to want to have a breathing technique that's more grounding, right? It's more balancing, like alternate nostril breathing. You can also do a practice called Brahmari. It's a Sanskrit word that translates to like a black bee buzzing sound, and it's a humming breath. And I found that for the springtime, this particular breathing technique can be very effective in spring because I think it balances both the qualities that people might be feeling that are a little more congested and feeling heavy, and at the same time can really balance people that are feeling a little ungrounded. So it's calming, but it's energizing at the same time. And what I mean by that is that it helps to calm the nervous system, but helps us to create an increased internal alertness.
Right.
And that really works for spring.
Is it better to do it at a certain time of the day? How do you navigate that?
Well, that starts getting into what's referred to as like a whole Ayurvedic clock. So there's times of day that might be better to practice certain practices based on the person's constitution and what the signs and symptoms are. But I will say this, just do it. Doesn't matter what time of day.
That's right.
Doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you're sitting on the edge of your bed. Doesn't matter if you're sitting in a chair in an office. Just do it. I think people get too stuck in like, I have to be sitting on a meditation cushion and I have to be surrounded by birds and by beautiful music and it's like, stop. Just do the practice.
I have to say that I'm lucky enough to have that environment. And so I can actually want that and actually have it.
Yeah, that might be ideal, right? But we don't live in an ideal world most of the time,
Yeah.
right? We've
That's
got
right.
kids screaming in the bathroom because they need their ass wiped. We've got dogs needing to get walked
Exactly.
and barked because we got all these things going on, right?
Hmm.
So whenever you find the
Exactly.
time, do the practice that's going to be balancing for you.
The right timing is whenever you see the opportunity, just do it. I think that's great advice. And so we kind of covered spring. What would you recommend during summer?
Shoot it over to you. I'll ask you a couple of questions. Do you think
Yeah.
summer has more to do with the hot quality or the cool quality?
I sweat a lot, so it's there's a lot of heat.
By the hot quality the most, right? I mean, and
That's
that's
right.
usually across the board. Even climates that don't get that hot, it's hotter for them than
Right.
it
Mhm.
typically is, right?
Yes.
But you're in place like Antarctica or the North Pole or something, you might not have to deal with the hot quality too much. But so first and foremost, right? I mean, that's a very specific and direct quality that we can balance and affect. And so there's
Mhm.
two cooling breaths specifically, and the breaths that are actually, it's very rare in yoga and in Ayurveda that you're actually breathing in through the mouth. Mostly because there's several filtration processes that the breath goes through when you breathe through the nose as opposed to the mouth where there are zero. So there's that, but it's a very slow breath through the mouth. And there's two different techniques that are considered to be cooling breaths. So, but we also want to keep in mind too that heat has an innate tendency to rise, and breathing techniques that are going to be more calming for the mind, because the hot quality also affects our behavior, right? We can get a little more hot headed, right? We say
Yeah.
these things in vernacular all the time, right? We're
Mm.
just putting it in different contexts, right? People lose their temper more, in the summer months, oftentimes they're a little bit more impatient. So the hot quality is playing a role in all that. So cooling and calming are two qualities that you want to find in the breathing technique.
What do you mean by when the heat has a tendency to like easily rise? What does that mean?
Well, if I have a lighter
Mhm.
and I turn the lighter on and then I flip the lighter upside down, where does the flame go? Still up,
Yeah,
right? So heat will always rise. That's just
that's a
nature. That's
right.
that's science.
That's okay. Okay, got
So
you.
we're a microcosm of the macrocosm. So heat's the same thing within us as it is in nature.
Okay, so that you can use. I guess the intention is like to keep yourself as cool and grounded, so that you don't get affected too much by the heat.
Right. And that we keep the heat in its main site, which in Ayurveda is considered to be the small intestine or the navel area, right? We need the heat there, right, to digest, absorb, assimilate, help with elimination. But we want to keep it in its main site, right? We don't want to feel a lot of heat rising, to the head. And so
Right.
this is where the calming and cooling breaths come in.
And in autumn, because things are slowing down and getting colder.
Yeah, so in autumn in a four season environment, it is another very changeable season, for us. And I think that um, those other qualities, in that we're starting to experience, like the dry quality, right? We start to
Hmm.
see the leaves dry up. The light quality, there tends to be a little bit more of like this light crispness to the air.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes in environments start to get very windy, right? So
Yeah.
there's changeability in the wind. So there's also the mobile quality that's associated with the fall, and it starts to get cooler, right?
Hmm.
It starts to get that crispness, and you can feel it, right? I mean, anybody that's
Right.
lived in a forced environment, the day where you pull out that blanket for the first time and put it on your
Yeah.
back. Okay, it's here.
Yeah.
And so those are the qualities where the cool quality starts to creep in. There is a transition, however, where like in spring, when we start to shed those excess earth and water elements,
Right.
in the fall there's this period of time where we're also shedding
The
more of those
heat.
fire elements.
Hmm.
And so we might go through this phase of releasing excess heat in the body. So we don't want start doing warming practices just yet. We want to allow that process of any excess heat to be released. So we're not really doing cooling breathing techniques. We're not really doing warming breathing techniques. And this is where I find more neutral breathing practices like alternate nostril breathing, something that balances, something that is very steady and grounding.
What's a physical manifestation of heat being released from your body?
Well, depending on the person, it could show up as rashes. It could show up as acne,
Right.
oily skin, oily hair, loose stools. And then behaviorally, again, it could show up as being more impatient, feeling a little bit more on edge, feeling a little bit more irritable.
And then in winter, where the days are shorter, the light is, you have maybe 4 hours of proper light, and then drama queen, but like you have very limited amount of light, and then it's very cold, and you just want to stay indoors because yeah, stepping out is such an effort. So I guess their breath work would be trying to generate heat. Would that be correct?
It's true. Yeah, this is where, where we want to balance the cold quality with the hot quality. And so we want to create more heat. So there's breathing techniques that help to do that, like this bellows breath in particular, that again is a really short, sharp inhale and exhale, forcing the breath more out through the nostrils and pumping the abdomen, right? So we're really engaging the abdominal wall. So a lot of the attention is going to get drawn to main site of the fire element, which is in the navel, and just more dynamic movement, right? A more dynamic breathing technique or more dynamic movement, for the abdominal area is also, pretty effective. But yeah, more heating breaths and more breaths that are balancing the heavy quality. Oftentimes we feel that heavy and the damp
Right.
and the cloudy quality. So we also want breathing techniques that feel more uplifting. So again, this might be a more kind of rapid type of breath, like skull shining breath, where they're very short, sharp breaths. And there's more of this upward lifting energy to it.
Being feeling low in terms of mood could be a breathing technique that could be useful.
Yeah, I would say that if the qualities of the depression are more, have those heavy, motivated, listless qualities to them, um, then something more uplifting and more of a rapid breathing would be effective. In Ayurveda, they make clear more distinctions of types of depression. Some depressions are more rooted in anxiety,
Right.
fear, and loneliness, and a breathing techniques that's going to really
Uplift.
increase that lightness quality
Right.
wouldn't be for them. It might actually aggravate it. So it's
Mm.
it's challenging, right? There's this framework that's so beautiful, and there's some general guidelines that we can follow in Ayurveda. It's tough because my teachers taught me to always ask for whom. when
Right.
you're giving a remedy, when you're recommending, these things, we're always asking for whom. So Ayurveda is a system that has amazing tools for preventative care. There's a lot of general things that we can do seasonally to help find more balance and increase health,
Right.
particularly in terms of lifestyle. But at the end, if we want to get really specific, if we want to have the most potency from the practices, yeah, we dive a little bit deeper and look at the qualities of the signs and symptoms that we're experiencing. These breathing techniques can fit into your life. Again, it doesn't have to be bird singing and you have to spend a half hour. Like we're talking 3 minutes, we're talking 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I've worked with people, and with one particular client that I worked with, we decided that they were going to do their breathing technique in the car before they went into their house.
Mm.
It was the only place that they felt they had 5 minutes where somebody wasn't asking them to do something, right? The breath has three components: the inhale, the exhale, and then there's this retention. There's a pause between the inhale and exhale. And encourage people that I work with that feel very stressed, that feel like the demands of life get to them often, to find those moments in between the inhale and the exhale of life, and pause and take a conscious pause. And if you can even add in a couple of minutes to do a breathing technique, that's a great time to do it.
The cycle of the breath, right? As you nicely described it, most of the time we are not really conscious about that cycle. We breathe in surface. Hence why having that break, and be it like the car or in the toilet, focusing on that cycle and noticing that cycle is what we should be starting to do more. And that's basically what you're promoting.
Anytime we start paying attention to our own breath, it lengthens naturally for the most part, right? There's this
Right.
natural, once we become conscious of the breath, it lengthens. But as a teacher or practitioner, we get to observe other people's breath, and it's like 3 or 4 seconds long.
What's a good indicator that you are breathing in a proper way?
Things that I told my students in particular, when they're practicing, right? We're doing physical exercises and we're moving. And so, throughout the practice, I'm encouraging them to observe their breath, because it's a mirror as to like what your nervous system is experiencing.
Right.
To realize that it's a two-way street, right? So if I'm shallow breathing, think about when somebody's scared or anxious, right? The breath rate starts to increase, or sometimes we'll even hold the breath and we'll stop breathing.
Right.
So that is going to then affect what kind of hormones are released in the body, right? These fight or flight hormones. We live in this, like a lot of us, in this low grade stress mode, and our breath is reflective of that. And so if we can lengthen the breath, become more conscious of the breath, it's something that happens automatically. So it's not like I'm going throughout my whole day, counting my breaths.
Right.
But much more, that would be like weird. But if, we become more conscious of the type of breathing that we're doing throughout the day, we might catch ourselves with short breathing, and then, just lengthen it. It's, again, it happens automatically when we become more conscious of the breath, and then it starts to feel, then it becomes training, right? Like muscle memory. We start to basically increase our capacity for fuller, more comfortable breath. So then we start taking fuller breaths in more comfortably, naturally. And that's, my business partner and I, which we always joke. It's like, when we're teaching people physical postures, we feel more like we're teaching them how to breathe more than
Right.
getting Warrior One. It really does affect then what the nervous system is experiencing, and then how the rest of the body, a glandular system is going to be affected. So, I'm not going to say 6-second breath is the perfect length for your inhale or exhale, because there's probably different schools of thought out there that might say different. But by becoming more aware of the breath and allowing the breath to lengthen naturally is key, right? Because for me to take a full breath in naturally, when I'm conscious of it, it's like it could be up to 10 seconds long.
Right.
Tell somebody else to take a 10-second breath, that's going to make them anxious as hell.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been to those yoga classes and I'm like, I only reached 4. Is something wrong with me?
Yeah.
Right. And then you start going, there's something wrong with me. Then you start intellectualizing, right? And it's really, when I'm working with people, it's getting them into a feeling of their breath, to find their most comfortable but fullest breath.
Yeah, it's basically what you said, is being conscious of your breath. And there's actually studies out there that shows how long and conscious your breathing is, the more impact there is between the mind and body connection. So it has really an impact on your nervous system and the psychological status as well. So we have now science that confirms some of those ancient wisdoms, theories. So
I mean, it's to me fascinating that they've known this for thousands and thousands of years. Now they're like plugging into your brain and looking at your brain waves. And
Right.
they didn't have all that, thousands of years ago, but they knew. And like you said, now we have a lot of studies. Well, not a lot, but more studies showing up.
It's going slowly.
Yeah.
Mm. I mean, we are one of the practitioners we interviewed. She's a yoga therapist and also an Ayurvedic practitioner and acupuncturist, Tissy. The way she described it was very nice, where she said, basically, in the past, the art of observation was, the way that you understood illness and sickness, um, just to identify it, right? And so being a practitioner in these sort of fields is like just becoming a really good observer because they didn't have the medical tools back in the day, right?
Right.
So I think, okay, so you just have to be better at observing your own self, and then you be more knowledgeable of what's happening inside of you, right?
Yeah. And that's when we're going to catch these, what these primordial signs and symptoms that we oftentimes blow off, right? Gas, bloating, indigestion,
Mm.
my stomach feels full a few hours after I eat. These are things that if we don't ignore these signs and symptoms, that's when they're the most manageable.
That's right.
It's when we ignore
Preventive.
them and they're reoccurring, and
Mhm.
we keep ignoring them. Now we're starting to get in these different stages of disease, and they start to become more complicated. So that observation, being a good observer is, I think, the first step into improved health.
And so by being conscious in your breathing, that then allows you to identify those signals, because again, what we're trying to do, and I think the body is so well made to preventively tell you, hey, like there's something going on, pay attention. And if you're not being conscious and breathing consciously, then you kind of overlook those things. And this is where you come to a chronic stage, and this is where you need an allopathic doctor.
I just wanted to ask you, like, out of, we today we focus on breath work, and kind of the impact, in the different seasons. But of course, there's other lifestyle factors that are important, but we didn't cover, which is like food and nutrition and sleep, which we touched on a bit. But between all these elements, how much do you think breath work, or how much does it weigh in the overall, like, as pie of it, if they can't manage all the other areas of their life as well?
Incorporating more conscious breathing or specific breathing techniques is, for me, a pretty big priority. I feel
Mhm.
like the breath is a bridge for not only affecting my nervous system, the quality of my mind, which then, if we go a little bit further, is also associated with consciousness, right? So how
Mm.
I'm actually not just moving through the life, but consciously, but how I'm moving through life unconsciously.
Right.
Mm.
Um, and it's affecting vital life force. In yoga and Ayurveda, we consider this vital life force to be called prana.
Mhm.
Sometimes people call it chi or ki, but there's
Yeah.
this, most wisdom traditions, they believe that there's this vital life force, and breath isn't the same as prana, but it's a vehicle.
Mm.
And our breathing is affecting that vital life force. And if we're not breathing properly, if we're not allowing ourselves to focus or incorporate breathing techniques that are going to be more balancing for us, um, you know, all of those systems, right, are going to be affected. The qualities of my mind, my nervous system, my glandular system, all the tissues in my body, right, all the way
Mhm.
from just me oxygenating my blood,
Right.
Mm.
right, with breathing properly, and what that oxygenated blood does to my brain and what it does to my tissue. So, you know, and the bottom of is, if we stop breathing, we die.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
That's
right.
how important breath is.
Mm. No,
Yeah.
yeah.
We dismiss it since we're living in a very fast-paced life, and we think, yeah, I'm breathing, but it's not really proper breathing if you're not conscious about it, right?
I really like the analogy of using breath as the bridge to these other element, which is sleep or nutrition. So I really like that. Thanks for that.
To close off, like, are there any solutions or tips you can offer our listeners of what they can start with today so that they can actually start working on bridging that gap?
Yeah, one of the things that I emphasize a lot with students and clients is routine. This is something that if we have an aversion to a routine, it puts a sour taste in our mouth, right? The mundane, oh, I gotta do the same thing every day. And you can give yourself a little bit of leeway, in terms of what your day looks like. But the reality of it is our days for most of us are already all over the place, right? I mean, the unexpected comes up all the time, and we're multitasking or trying to multitask and doing all this. If we add a little bit of routine in the morning and a little bit of routine in the evening, I've found that it's very effective in order to get our nervous system and our biorhythms on board, and really gets us set up for the day and allows us to get prepared to wind down. So just doing a few things in the same order every day, right? First thing in the morning, right? Before you do anything else. One of the things that I think is helpful is conscious breathing, and gratitude. They take a couple of minutes.
Mm,
Just acknowledging something that you're grateful for, or that you appreciate. Even if it's a memory, it might not even be something in the moment, just a memory. Takes a moment, to acknowledge and to wake up your heart, and then use these other things to wake up your senses. And even if it's just sitting up on the edge of your bed, placing the soles of your feet on the floor and doing a couple minutes of conscious breathing, even inhale, even exhale. Keep it that simple, but the consistency of it is what's going to give you the gifts. Right? It doesn't have to be complex. It should be consistent. And then the evening, same thing. Before you lie down for bed, soles of the feet on the floor, sit up tall, conscious breathing.
It's discipline, right? And there's this quote that, or the name of a book actually, discipline equals freedom. And I truly believe that. So
Yeah. And sometimes we have to ask for help. If we have other people in a household,
yeah,
we're shy. We're so unshy about all these other things, right, in our life. When it comes to family and our spouse, and we'll tell them exactly what we want in these other realms. But when it comes to self-care, when it comes to be like, when I first wake up, this is what I want my morning to look like. We don't do that. We don't ask for these things. We don't say, this is what I need. And
right.
so and excuses come up, or we get sidetracked. And so I think asking for help, if we have other people in the household, can be really important. Or get the kids involved, like,
mm,
do this with me.
yeah.
Lead by, it's a good way to getting them involved in healthier habits too. I mean, they'll probably be like, you're weird.
Being a child of a household that included meditation, we didn't find it awkward because it's part of everyone's routine, and that when mom is meditating, you need to be silent and quiet and mind your own business for at least 10 minutes. And I think that's a very healthy habit.
Well, let's make it the norm,
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that, James.
Mhm.
And as always, to do our closing and our rapid fire questions. So for the first question, what is your first sign that you are out of balance?
For me, I start to feel anxious. If I'm feeling like I'm talking fast, or if I feel like I'm a little ungrounded or I'm forgetful. These are just signs and symptoms that I notice in me, that I know I need to slow down. I and immediately check in with myself.
And so, as a follow up, in those moments, what are your coping mechanism and methods for you to get back in balance?
Pausing, taking a moment, taking a break from what I'm working on, taking a break from answering phone calls, looking at my phone. I take a break. And now conscious breathing kind of automatically kind of comes in, where I'm just focused on my breath. But and again, this is just a moment.
Mhm.
It's not a half
Nice.
hour long. You just take a minute to pause.
Yeah. What is one book that impacted you or your approach to well-being and health?
I would say Perfect Health by Deepak Chopra. When I first started learning Ayurveda, it was very confusing to me. It's like I wanted to apply these
Mm,
concepts, but I didn't really know how. And I felt like that was one of the first books that helped me to organize some of my thoughts.
Mm.
It's a pretty well laid out book, especially for Westerners who might be hearing a lot of these terms for the first time.
Well, James, it was such a pleasure to speak to you and to have you on our show. And thank you for taking the time. And hopefully we impart some wisdom with our breathwork conversation with you.
It was a pleasure, and it was really lovely being here. And yeah, I enjoyed it. So thanks for asking me.
If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and select that follow or subscribe button. For now, stay safe and we'll see you next week.